or Islamist terrorists. Let's discuss with Representative from Texas, former CIA undercover officer, member of the Committee for Homeland Security, Will Hurd. Congressman, thank you for joining us. Best to your family for Christmas.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
So let's talk about whether or not this matters, okay? In Germany, they had the wrong guy. Now they're looking at a Tunisian. In Turkey, we still don't understand whether or not this was a man motivated by secular Syrian concerns or Sunni sectarian concerns or Islamic extremism. The president-elect comes out right away and bundles them all as this is Islamic terrorism. We got to get after it. Is there any concern with doing that?
Well, attribution in attacks is incredibly important to do. Sometimes, despite the signatures of a particular attack that may look like a calling card of a known organization or a known terrorist group, it may not be. This could impact the investigation. And so yes, I think before trying to attribute an attack, you should know who it is first. And when it comes to the Middle East, it's such a complex and convoluted place. And when you talk about Turkey in specific and Russia's activity in Syria, Russia has created a lot of enemies. And there's a lot of folks that would like to see something happen to the government of Russia. There's been protests against the Russian embassy in Turkey for a number of weeks, and the relationship between the Turks and the Russians have been incredibly tense since the Turks downed a Russian plane a number of months ago.
Congressman, you speak to the American concern that complexity is, in effect, weakness, and that what resonated during the campaign was the president-elect saying, I'm not going to mince words. We know what this is. This is Muslims who are trying to kill us, and everybody else wants to dance around it with political correctness. I'm not going to do that. His team is using this situation as an example of his directness. Is there criticism of that, or is he just speaking in a way that Americans understand? Well,
I do believe that the greatest problem and greatest challenge that we have in the Middle East is Islamic terrorism. And ISIS is the poster child of that. And we need to be doing everything we can to stop ISIS in its tracks on their home turf. And that is going to make us safer here in the homeland. And so this, but there's other issues at play in the Middle East. Iran's influence in that region, Russia's growing influence in that region. So there's a number of challenges that we have, and it is complex, as I've said. But you know, the challenge of Islamic extremism, if we would have stopped them in Syria from growing, you wouldn't have some of the problems that we're seeing throughout Europe. You wouldn't have an entity that's able to inspire people even if they're 6,000 miles away. That's something that's incredibly troubling about ISIS's capabilities, and it's a capability we did not see in Al-Qaeda or other groups before them.
Let's shift topics and get your take on what you make of the president-elect and supporters around him refusing to acknowledge the intelligence consensus that Russia was behind the hacks that took place during the election, and Senate Majority Leader McConnell's rejection of a select committee on hacking. He says the existing committees can handle it.
Well, I think a number of issues have been conflated over the last couple of weeks on this particular topic. It's very clear that the Russians did not influence our election. When it comes to the voting boxes, you know, manipulating the ones and zeros of the voting boxes, that did not happen. But it is clear that organizations tied to Russian intelligence was involved in the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and the DNC hacks. The reality is the DCCC spent $6 million trying to unseat me. An attack on them is an attack on all of us. And there has to be a clear and concise response to any kind of cyber attack on the U.S. government or our businesses that have been perpetrated by nation states. And so I think that what needs to happen going forward is the national intelligence apparatus needs to have a clear assessment of, can we figure out what indeed were the intentions of these groups? who made the call? And if we don't have the high-placed sources to do that, what is the strategy to get there? And the best people to oversee that are the existing intelligence oversight committees. The members that are on those committees understand intelligence. They understand the need to protect intelligence. And when it comes to trying to understand the plans and intentions of one of our biggest adversaries, that means we got to have very well-placed human sources that are putting themselves in harm's way. And the folks on the intelligence committees are the ones that are able to protect that kind of information so that we can protect those people that are trying to give us insights.
So you're believing, to borrow an expression from the president-elect, that he should call it what it is when it comes to these hacks, which is Russia's involvement in trying to disrupt the democratic process. Why, we need to discover. And in terms of how you get to that answer, you're okay with the existing committees?
The existing committees are the best place. Understanding the intentions of our adversaries is incredibly important. Knowing the tactics they use to gather information is also important. And trying to prevent certain outcomes from happening is important as well. And this is something that there has to be a clear response to this behavior so it doesn't happen in the future. You know, I've been calling for months at a minimum we should have at least kicked the Russian ambassador out of the United States or the senior intelligence officer. To show that we're not playing around. It's not enough to tell someone to cut it out. There has to be a clear consequence to this kind of behavior.
That would be a strong move, though, removing a diplomat from the country. I haven't even heard that suggested. Do you think there's any chance that happens?
Well, we'll see in the coming weeks, but it has to be strong. Anybody trying to attempt to manipulate our elections in any form or fashion is unacceptable. And the Russians have a long history of information operations. They've been doing this in Eastern Europe for a number of years. The Germans have been concerned about Russian activity there. You cannot let this happen again into the future. You cannot allow this, you know, for anybody in the United States to question the integrity of our elections, and we cannot allow an adversary like Russia to get away with this kind of behavior.
An interesting suggestion from you, Congressman Hurd. Right now we have a president-elect that, while in 2014 he acknowledged what you're talking about right now, Russia's meddling, now he refuses to touch it. We'll see what happens from here. We look forward to coming back to you for more perspective on this. All the best for Christmas.
Thank you, sir.
All right, be well. Allison.